So I have this aftermarket expansion tank on here for the intercooler reservoir and the heat exchanger, and it has water in it, but it is getting a little bit of dirt buildup there. You can see I just lightly touched the surface with a screwdriver there, and it just dusted away the surface, you know. So I'm going to attempt to soak up most of this water and use a microfiber to get all that dirt out of there without cutting myself on this rusty area. I'm going to try to clean that up too. But anyway, just a little maintenance thing with these tanks. As they get older, they have problems like that. But the water is quite clear, so it's not too big of a problem. I would worry about it gunking up the intercooler under there, but it looks pretty clean. So just need to get all this out of here and clean it up. Alright, so we're going to get started on this little project today. Clean out this tank. And I've done this before with the radiator ones, which is actually a lot harder to do. This one is just perfectly clean in here. There's just bright green coolant. Probably hard to tell, but this one's clean. This one's really nice. I've cleaned the plastic ones out before. We fill them with water and shake them out, and take it off and fill up with water, shake it out, clean it, and just muddy brown water comes out. And luckily this one's pretty clean, but this one there is just this layer of dirt down in there, and so we're going to get this cleaned up. Actually need a screwdriver to help pry this up a little bit, but we've looked in here, it's kind of dirty, and so I'm just going to take off those two bolts down there and these fittings with a screwdriver, or usually you can get like an 8mm on those. So you can disconnect the hoses and unbolt it here, and I'm going to suck the water out of this with a shop vac. So we took these out with a screwdriver, and these usually never come out very nice for me. It's like every time I use these kind of fasteners, I start to unscrew them and they just rotate in there. But what I've found that helps a lot is if you just hold the back of it up a little bit, or put a flathead underneath and raise the rim of this just to put some pressure against it so the threads start coming out. So that worked out nicely. This one came out actually nicer than usual. I'm not going to undo these because I can get to the bolts pretty easy there. And the hardware was kind of messed up. It was like, anyway, it had a bolt on the back, and I'm going to see if I can do something better with the hardware. But as you can see, I'll pull out my little handy dandy iPhone flashlight. The tank is dirty. You can see where I touched the bottom of it there with a screwdriver, and it just kind of cleaned the surface of the floor there. And the water is clear. The water seems nice, but the tank's kind of gross inside, so I want to take this off and clean it. I'm going to try to sand these edges down and maybe even put some primer or something there to keep it from rusting, because that's a common problem with these. But the water looks clear. I can see the water very clearly in there. After I take this off and clean it, I'll run the intercooler pump and we'll see if dirty water comes out. And if it does, we'll just cycle it out and keep sucking it out until we get it cleaned out. But this is what I want to start to do. So initially I thought that I would just get rags and soak this water up out and clean out the bottom of all this, but I realized the better thing to do would just be to take it all the way off and get it where I can dump it out and clean it and everything. So I'm going to use the shop vac here to suck the water out, and it's just distilled water in here, so it's really not going to be much of a problem at all. And I actually bought several gallons of distilled water. You can see here that I've had saved up to do coolant swaps, coolant flushes and changes for the cars, and intercooler pump and everything. So I've been waiting to do this for a little while, and I already have everything I need, hopefully. So let's get this project going. one thing I'm very, very specific about is not letting the vacuum hose touch the bumper of the car and scratch it. Especially when you work on cars in the engine bay a lot, the fenders get scratched up when people lean on them or put their hands on them, and that's something I'm going to completely avoid with this car. You know, either put something down on the fenders or, you know, tape them off or whatever it is, but I do not want to scratch up any of the car while I do these projects, because that's happened before in the past. And you have friends help you sometimes and they put their hands all over it or they scratch it with a screwdriver. So it's just something that I'm taking extra special caution with today. But that sucked up all the water out of there. I even put it on there and sucked a little bit out of the other way through the pump. So hopefully this doesn't spill anything anywhere. If it does, it's just water, but we'll get this tank cleaned up. So with these hoses, what I've learned in the past is the best way to get these off, especially if they have some heat to them, is to grab them and twist them until they break loose. You don't want to get a screwdriver and pry them, or you'll start cutting them up and digging them. This one, it was exactly like what I'm saying. It was on there pretty, probably hot from the heat through this thing, and I twisted it until it snapped loose, and then I can slowly just pull it back. And I'm still going to hold this thing upright in case there is any water in the lines, so that, I'll put it up so that it doesn't leak onto anything. It seems pretty dry, but we'll just pry it up in there for now. I did notice down here on the side there is a 13 that is holding this specific tank on. It's one of those things where you can be very gentle with it as you're moving it around, and if it feels like it's stuck on something or secure, be very careful and figure out what it is before you start pulling on it and break anything. So that'll come out nicely. Alright, so the tank's off. This one was a little difficult to get off, just like the other one. I twisted it. I was very careful not to gouge up the plastic of this or scratch up this as I did it, because the tank wanted to move around, but it's all off, not dripping anything anywhere. And here we can come out and see this tank, and you can see it's got some pretty gross looking water in there, kind of brown, and so I know it's going to be difficult to see, but well, as a matter of fact, yeah. But anyway, with the shop vac, when I sucked it out, it actually cleaned up quite a bit of this, the floor in there. It actually cleaned it up good, but there's still some kind of sludgy water on the sides there, and we're gonna clean this up good. So. I've never had much of a use for these kind of drivers. This is a snap-on pivoting head, and it's always just gotten in the way. It seems like it always moves on me and stuff. But in this case, this is going to be real helpful to get this hardware off, because there's bolts that have nuts on the back side, and I can get on there really good and hold it still. So, alright, so with all this hardware out, this lifts off. And now I'll be more safe about sticking my arm in here to clean the bottom and sides of this thing out and the top. But also, this thing is pretty bad on the back. It's pretty gross and corroded, pretty rusted. I don't want this stuff falling into my tank and running through my intercooler system. And so I'm going to get this taken care of. I'm going to sand this all down. I'm going to prime it. I'm going to make sure that this isn't a problem. Alright, so what I'm doing here is I decided to go ahead and get a Dremel tool with some sanding wheels on there and start cleaning this up. I'm going to sand this all down and get it ready for some primer, something I can put on there so it won't rust anymore. And of course, I'm wearing safety goggles. You really want to make sure to take care of yourself, because all it takes is one little accident to hurt yourself, and then you won't be able to do these kind of things. I mean, your eyesight is so important, so always take care of yourself. Alright, so you can see that's really starting to knock that off. It looks really good. Alright, so it's been a pretty extensive project today. I did clean and sand this and wire brushed it, and I'm going to hit it with some of this clear coat, keep it from rusting. And right now I'm just going in the rim here. You can see what the wire wheel is doing. See, that's what it used to look like. I'm just going around and getting all that rust buildup off. So we're making progress. It's looking pretty good. Clean this out a lot too. I used some brake cleaner on the inside and Scotch-Brite on this sponge, and just cleaned all the inside and washed it out several times. So I'll go around here with a wire wheel, clean it all out, and be done. Alright, so now I'm just going with a wire brush and I'm hitting up this hardware. It's, you know, kind of gross from being underneath. This was on the inside of the tank there. So cleaning up the hardware real nice. What I ended up doing was I went ahead and hit this with some clear coat on the back. Doesn't really matter what it looks like on the back side, just to keep the rust from coming back. And then I hit the rest of it with red enamel, and then I cleaned the rim off because I didn't want the top of it red like that. So this way that'll keep the rust from forming. So I'll just get this all put back together. Alright, so this is basically the finished product here. It opens and closes a lot more smoothly than it did before. It's painted here on the inside just with some red paint enamel to keep it from rusting again. The back side is clear coated even though it looks wire wheeled, which is what I did with it. So this I cleaned out. There's a spring in the middle here that was kind of gross, and so I cleaned that out and moved it all around with some brake cleaner and everything. The tank is looking really good. It has just kind of a weird finish on the inside anyway, but I did take the wire wheel and clean out the insides of these fittings here and here. Cleaned them all the way in and out with wire wheel with that Dremel tool, and all on the rim here. So the tank's clean. It's ready to go back on the car. The pieces are all fitting nicely. I was worried that if you got too thick a paint in here that this wouldn't close, but it's working just right. So I'm going to reinstall this and put it all back together. So I'm going to put this all back together. I have my little buddy helper here. And I'm just going to put some thread locker on these bolts as I put them back in with the seal. But these are lock washers, but they've been used once. I'm not sure if that's going to compromise them, so I'll just use some thread sealer on that. Alright, so what I'm doing now that the tank's back installed is I'm jumping the relay for the intercooler pump, and that's cycling fresh water through the whole system. And as it's been cycling it through, I've been taking the shop vac and sucking out the dirty water. And then adding more fresh distilled water. And it's really not that dirty. It's just lightly milky from whatever was left in the heat exchanger and the intercooler. So I've done this with about 3 gallons of fresh water, and then it's looking like it's coming out pretty clear now. Before I put the tank back on, I did take the shop vac and suck all the water out of the intercooler lines, making sure that the heat exchanger and intercooler were all empty of the somewhat dirty water that was in there before I started adding all the fresh water. Alright, so that's that. We got a nice clean tank of water, no more rust on either side, and a nice sealing reservoir tank.